And now we're ready to get started. For those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of IT service management education. We've developed all content in-house. That includes all ITIL education as well as process design, Agile, and DevOps. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. And we'll close this one, Donna, and give you this. So 46% somewhat familiar, 29% of you are very familiar, 14% not familiar at all, and 11% extremely familiar. So thank you for sharing that information to give Donna a sense of our audience today. We much appreciate that. At ITSM Academy, we believe that one of our important roles in the industry is to help organizations get buy-in for their IT service management programs. To assist you in your efforts, we are offering this webinar and many of our previous webinars to you and your team in a virtual environment at no charge. There's no selling involved in this. It's just our way of reaching out to the community to help organizations with their IT service management programs. So if you're interested in having us deliver this webinar for your group, please email us at info, I-N-F-O, at itsmacademy.com. Now let's introduce today's speaker, Donna Knapp. Donna has over 25 years of IT industry experience working as a practitioner, consultant, and trainer, and is known for her engaging and informative speaking style. Certifications include ITIL Expert, ITIL Practitioner, CPDE, CASM, CAPO, Certified Scrum Master, DevOps Foundation, and KCS Principles. She is the author of A Guide to Service Desk Concepts, 4th edition, A Guide to Customer Service Skills for Service Desk Professionals, 4th edition, and the ITSM Process Design Guide. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning, and good morning to everyone. And thanks so much for that feedback in the polls. It's very useful, and it excites me because it tells me that I think you're going to find this presentation very interesting. So we're going to talk today about Agile Service Management, and the title of the presentation includes Where ITIL Meets Agile. So let's start off just by defining what Agile Service Management is all about. So Agile Service Management is about adapting Agile and Scrum values and practices, and we'll talk about both those values and those practices in this presentation, to IT service management processes and process design and improvement activities. So what Agile Service Management is about is understanding that the principles of Agile and the benefits of the methodology like Scrum don't stop with Agile software development. They're very, very applicable to what we're doing in IT service management, and they're particularly applicable to those of you, the 23% of you who said you are bimodal, which means you have the capability to deliver both Agile and traditional waterfall projects. And the 41% of you who said you're already introducing Agile and DevOps practices. So it's very important that we not think about Agile just in terms of software development, but we bring it over into the ops side of the house and talk about it in the context of IT service management. ITIL, if you've never seen the official definition, is a set of best practice publications for IT service management. So I want to start off by defining what a process is. And before you groan and think to yourself, oh God, why is she starting here? Let me explain. I have two motivations here. The first motivation is that I spoke at the ITSM Fusion conference a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to a gentleman about DevOps and how they're adapting their IT service management processes to DevOps. And
I'm sorry, Donna. Excuse me, Donna. I'm sorry. People can just see the last polling question on your screen, not the presentation yet.
Can you turn it off on your end? You launched the poll, so I think you need to turn it off on your end. Let me see. All right. Has it gone away now?
Yes, I can see just the landing page for the webinar, not your presentation yet.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
I can. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to roll back one slide. You all have the presentation. I just want to show you that the definition for Agile Service Management is provided on the first slide. And now we're talking about processes. So speaking to somebody at the conference, they were introducing DevOps, and he said to me, we're getting ready to implement a new change management process in order to support DevOps. And my answer was, you don't need a new change management process. Whether you're implementing DevOps practices or whether you are using the change management process to manage your infrastructure or cloud-based services, the fundamental purpose and objectives of change management doesn't change. Change management's job is to control risk. The objectives are to ensure that you are optimizing the risk associated with making that change, maximizing the value associated with that change, controlling the change, which means we know what changed, we know when it changed, and we know who changed it. Hopefully everyone can agree that it doesn't matter what type of change you're managing. The fundamental purpose and objectives of the process don't change. My answer to that young man was, what you need is a different set of procedures. So you need absolutely a streamlined set of procedures in order to support DevOps, but you don't need a whole new process, and hopefully that makes sense. So by definition, processes define what work to do. They are an interrelated set of activities that take inputs and produce outputs that are of value to a customer, and procedures define how you do that work. And the procedures that you are required to execute may change depending on the type of change or the type of activity, right? This applies to any process that we might be talking about that you're undertaking. I also, my second motivation in starting here is I want to bring in the term practices, because the term practices is getting thrown around a lot these days. And I want to, first of all, talk about what practices are, and then kind of bring this all together a little bit further down the road with an example. So practices by definition are activities that are repeated and that are socially recognized, and the socially recognized part is the important part of it. They don't tend to be documented, they don't tend to be formalized. People may follow practices, they may not follow practices. And let me give you like a simple example in our everyday life. If you've ever gone to get on a subway and the subway doors only open on one side of the train, a generally accepted practice is the people who are getting on the train stand to the left or right of the doors to let the people come off the train, right? And then we, those of us who were waiting on the platform, can go ahead and get on the train. So that's an example of a practice. It's not documented anywhere. It's a socially accepted norm. Now, if you come to where I live in Tampa, Florida, in our airport, we have trains that open on both sides. And this is an example of where a practice may become formalized and may, in fact, become a process, a regulated process. So in Tampa, the doors open on one side of the train, the people get off on that side. About 30 seconds later, the doors on the other side of the train come, and then people can get onto the train, right? So we've now formalized that process of getting people on and off the train. So this will all come back into play, again, a little bit later on with some examples. So why are processes important? And repeatable is really a key word here. Without that aspect of repeatability, you really don't have the ability to measure what you're doing. You never have the ability to really determine, is your process effective? Is it achieving the desired results? Is it efficient? Are we using an appropriate amount of resource in order to perform that particular process? If you're constantly tweaking a process, you're constantly changing the procedures associated with a process, you never have the ability to baseline that process and really see how it's performing. And without that, you can't figure out where your opportunities for improvement are. And without that baseline, you also certainly can't ever show proof that you have, in fact, made improvements. So when we're initially starting out with processes, it looks a little bit like this illustration on the left-hand side. Typically, we've got this little ad hoc set of procedures that people are following, and sometimes they're following them, sometimes they're not. Sometimes we're, hitting the mark, sometimes we're not. They're not repeatable, so we're really never sure on any given day how well we're going to do. As we start to formalize our processes in this second illustration, you start to get a little closer to the mark, right? You start to get the focus of everybody closer to understanding what the purpose of this process is, what the objectives of this process are. But we can go a little bit astray on any given day. And this third illustration to me is what it looks like when you've got perhaps a really overly bureaucratic process. You've got, way too many handoffs or way too many approvals. So it's one of those things where maybe you're executing the process pretty consistently, but you're still not hitting the mark, right? You're really not achieving the objectives of that particular process, and you're probably not satisfying your customers. It gets even worse if you automate a process, right? And there's an old expression that if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster, right? So but this is kind of what it can look like if you've got a poorly designed process that you then automate. So what we ultimately want to accomplish is a, well-defined process, a repeatable process that is efficient and effective, and that is achieving the goals and the objectives we need it to within our organization. So keep in mind that every process you have in place in your organization is perfectly designed to get the outcome it's getting, right? If you don't have well-designed processes, don't be surprised, right? If you're not achieving the desired results. So we've got to take a look at how we can improve our processes and how we can make them more agile. Why is this important? Look at this list, and I'm sure a lot of you out there are going to go, yep, that's our organization. We are being challenged to do things like reduce cycle times. It's a big part of why DevOps practices have emerged and become so I hate to use the term popular, but popular in our cultures today. We need to speed up experimentation and learning, because innovation, and more importantly, sustained innovation, is really what enables organizations to win today, and what really also gets people excited. And we have to be constantly innovating based on our customer feedback. We've got to think about our value streams and understand that they're getting increasingly complex. We've got to think about our knowledge workers and how our knowledge workers today are changing. In years gone by, knowledge workers were people who kept their knowledge between their ears, and today knowledge workers are walking around with these Mac Daddy telephones that really enable them to get the information they need when they need it. They also, of course, enable us to do things like improve communication and collaboration. And a big part of what we want to accomplish today is automate workflow. Let's start letting systems manage systems, and let people innovate, and let people manage and support the goals of the business. Let's let computers do what they're really good at doing, which is executing repeatable processes. So the definition of Agile Service Management said that Agile Service Management involves adapting Agile values and practices. So let's talk about those two components. So when we talk about Agile values, we draw those values from the Agile Manifesto, which was first introduced in 2001. Now we adapted a little bit. The principles of we value processes and tools over individuals and interactions. Excuse me, let me say that the other way. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, I think makes sense to all of us. Processes come into play there. We can adapt the notion of working software to working processes, or we can adapt it to efficient and effective processes. We value efficient and effective processes over comprehensive documentation. So what the Agile Manifesto says, if you're not familiar with it, and if you want to learn more about it, go on out to YouTube or go to the agilemanifesto.org website. There's lots of great information about it. What it says is there's value on the things on the right, but we value the things on the left more. So how do we adapt those things on the right? When it comes to processes, especially, what we want to aim for is just enough process, just enough control to enable us to be efficient and effective. And if you're just getting started implementing processes in your organization, you're really lucky because you can start light. Add weight or add rigor to your process only when it's absolutely necessary. For those of you who perhaps have mature processes in place, but you know that they may be overly rigorous or they're overly bureaucratic, take away that weight whenever you possibly can. And we're going to use Agile Service Management practices in order to do that. So just enough is one of the key thoughts and principles we want to take away from these Agile values. In product development, there is a concept known as a minimum viable product, and the notion of just enough comes into play here as well. So if we adapt that definition, a minimum viable product is the most pared down version of a process that can be released and still add enough value that people are willing to use it. You know, sometimes with our processes, especially overly rigorous processes, what we have is a big stick that we're using in order to force compliance. If we have a minimum viable process, we make it easy for people to do the right thing. And if you make it easy for people to do the right thing, they'll do the right thing. They won't try to find ways to work around the processes. When we're working on process design and improvement activities, minimum viable product is an important concept as well, because if we can kind of keep that mantra in our mind, what's the minimum viable process, we can all understand that it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes with process design and improvement, we try to design a perfect process that crosses every T and dots every I, and it takes us a really long time to do that, and we often end up with, rather than a lightweight version of that process, a way too heavy or way too rigorous version of that process. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough to meet the needs of your organization. So adapting Agile practices includes adapting as a methodology Scrum, which is an iterative and incremental Agile development framework. Now, you may often hear about Scrum, or you may be familiar with Scrum in the context of software design and improvement. But the fact that a very high percentage of you were either extremely knowledgeable and very knowledgeable about Scrum, you know, close to 50% of you there, or at least somewhat aware of Scrum, you're hopefully aware that Scrum can really be adapted to any type of project, whether it's a process design and improvement project or an infrastructure upgrade project. It doesn't matter. It's a good framework that you can use for managing projects. The key concepts here are that it's iterative. So we have these cycles, and they are very short cycles. In Scrum, that's called a sprint. And typically sprints run 2 to 4 weeks. One of the important principles within Scrum is to time box your work. Now, why does time boxing the work important? Because it gets people focused, because it creates a sense of urgency, because it doesn't allow for a project to just kind of keep spinning on and on and on, and we never actually get anything done. We create that time box, we make very clear, we state very clearly what we aim to accomplish during that period of time, and then we inspect at the end of that period of time what we accomplished. So in Scrum, what they produce is a potentially releasable product increment, right? A piece of software or a changed line of code. And with Agile Service management, what we look to have is a potentially releasable process increment. Now notice the word potentially there. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to release that process implement, but we have in fact produced an increment that we can demonstrate, that we can show to people, that we can get feedback on, and that we can then use or either improve or use going forward. From a minimum viable product standpoint, what you aim for with process design and improvement is to have minimum critical activities. So again, this notion of what's the most pared down version of a process that we need to have in place, not every process activity that might accommodate every condition that might occur in a given process. Now,
excuse me, Donna.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Stephanie's asking if you could put the presentation into presentation mode so it can be larger. We're seeing it not.
Unfortunately, I lose my
Tools.
GoToTraining tools when I do that. So I will. And unfortunately, I just know that I lose GoToTraining, and so I might have to pop out, and I apologize to everybody. GoToTraining just doesn't play nice when things are in presentation mode. But Stephanie, hopefully that helps. I've just lost some capability, so I might have to drop out every once in a while in order to get my toolbar back.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. So a Kanban board works really nicely with in conjunction with Scrum. You know, one of the things that Scrum does is say, let's pull out an increment of work, let's focus on that work during this 2 to 4 week period. You're going to define in your organization what that 2 to 4 week period looks like. But with Scrum, it's just kind of like, yeah, we're working on some stuff, right? So what a Kanban board is take that work and slice it into activities. So you have a better understanding of where that work is in terms of its progress. So are we in a planning stage? Are we in a development stage? Are we in a testing stage? So you can have better visibility in terms of what's happening. And the other thing a Kanban board helps you to do is limit work in progress. I really firmly believe that as organizations today, we just have a really bad habit of putting too much work in progress. And some of you may feel this on a day-to-day basis, that, you know, you're only capable of juggling 5 balls at one time, and yet, you know, your manager or your teammates or whoever insist on, you know, throwing you 5 additional balls on any given day. And so now you're trying to juggle 10 balls, and it probably falls apart at some point in the day.
Donna, I'm sorry.
So,
I'm sorry. The listeners are asking if you could put the view back the way you had it before. They said it was better the other way.
okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
There we go. All right. So, yeah, and apologies. This is unfortunately one of the kind of limitations of GoToWebinar. All right. So the Kanban board makes the work visible, and it also then lets us measure how long it's taking us to do things. So in the context of process design and improvement activities, it will let us measure how long does it take us to, you know, design or to improve a process. And a big part of what it does is it helps us understand this concept of velocity. And it's important to understand that velocity is understood in hindsight. So what velocity says is, let's look back on our last sprint and analyze how much work we were able to accomplish during that sprint. What did we commit to? If we committed to doing 10 things and we only got 5 of those things done, then we need to think about that when we're planning our next sprint. And when you can get to the point where over a series of sprints you're able to accomplish everything that you committed to accomplishing during that sprint, now you have an understanding of velocity. You have an understanding of how much work you are in fact capable of producing. And that's important because what it does is let us change the way we make commitments. So rather than saying, yes, indeed, we will get those 10 things done during the next 2 weeks, you can say that we know historically we're only capable of completing 5 things during that week, but you know what? trust us, right? I'm kind of using air quotes, but really Scrum will get to the point where you can say confidently, trust us. If we commit to completing 5 things, we will in fact complete those 5 things. So there's a lot of principles at play there, and I've kind of summed them up for you on this next slide. I'm not going to talk through this next slide again, but those concepts I talked about are here for you if you want to download the slides and kind of take a look at these characteristics of these Agile practices. One of the big things I hope you take away is that what Agile Service Management challenges us to do is to value incremental progress more than we value perfection. Now, we understand this concept, right? The notion, those of you who are familiar with ITIL, we have a whole entire publication dedicated to continual service improvement. Most of us are familiar with the Deming model, plan, do, check, act, right? So this notion of incremental improvement isn't a new one, but we are able to, by using things like Scrum and Kanban, we are, first of all, within the IT service management community, able to start sharing a common vocabulary with our counterparts on the dev side of the house. And we're also able, especially through a Kanban board, we're able to really start making that work visible and showing that progress. So here's where ITIL meets Agile. When we think about a process has a lot of components to it. A lot of times when people think process, maybe what pops into your head is like a flow chart of some kind, but really, if you break a process down, it has a lot of different components, and those components are illustrated here, right? Now, here's the really great part about ITIL. What ITIL does, if you crack open the ITIL publications, they give you the bulk of these components. So if you want to know what the policies are for a particular process, you can go into the ITIL book, look up that particular process, and it will provide for you examples of policies. Now, you might use that list as your starting point, you know, that you then throw darts at, and you might modify the policies a little bit, or you might add additional policies. But the idea of adopting ITIL is that you never start with a clean sheet of paper. You always start with ITIL as the starting point for your conversation, and then you adapt it from there. ITIL doesn't expect you to consider the guidance provided in these publications rules that are cast in concrete. What ITIL tells you is what to do. It doesn't tell you how to do it. You have to decide based on the needs of your organization how you're going to adapt the ITIL processes. But the information is there for you as a starting point. The role of the owner is clearly defined. The objectives for every process are clearly defined. Roles are provided. High-level activities are provided. So you, again, don't ever have to start with a clean sheet of paper. Now, let's talk about that in the context of Agile Service Management. Remember that we talked about this notion of a process increment, right? A potentially releasable process increment is what we produce coming out of a sprint. So you may have a sprint where you take a look at, for example, just the policies for a particular process, right? If that's a reasonable amount of work for you to complete in one sprint, at least you get that done, right? So think about each of these components of a process as a process increment, and then start planning out how you can work your way through defining these components, or perhaps improving these components if you've got a mature process in place using sprints, right? Using Scrum. Now, in Scrum, an important concept is the concept of done. So when we talk about a potentially releasable process increment, it does need to be something usable, right? It has to be something that we would be willing to provide to other people for review, or that we could provide to, maybe we have a tool and we need to configure that tool in some way, and so we provide information about our activities that could be used to configure our tool. It has to be in a usable condition. It has to meet your team's definition of done, and you're going to define what done is for your organization. Now, I used as one of my examples, let's take a sprint and look at our policies. So done may mean that the policies have been documented. Perhaps you have some document management system where all your policies live, and so the policies have been added to that documentation management system. Maybe you say that they have gone through a presentation where you've gone in and you've presented these new policies to the leadership of your organization and you've gotten approval to go forward with those policies. You're going to define for your organization what done is all about, but you need to do that up front so that you don't have a situation where one person thinks you're done just because you produced meeting minutes with the policies that you agreed upon, and another person thinks, but until we get it into that documentation management system, until we get approval, it's not done, right? There has to be agreement on what done is all about. And remember, you may not release anything at this point in time. You may need to look at other process components before you can start rolling them out within your organization, but at least you've got that part of your process done. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can approach these sprints. For anybody out there that's a certified process design engineer, shout out to you. You're familiar with the 10 steps of process design and improvement, and I've provided the 10 steps for you here. They're excerpted from the ITSM process design guide. So if you're implementing a new process, maybe you chunk up the 10 steps into a series of sprints. So you're going to have an initial planning meeting where you get clear on what process you're looking to implement or improve. You make sure that you're really clear about the vision for that process, and then you may undertake a sprint to undergo the traditional activities like documenting, as is, baselining performance. Even if you don't have a formal process, typically within IT today, you're doing the process in some way. You're just doing it in an ad hoc manner. Maybe you have a series of activity sprints for the different activities. Notice, sprint plural here, because if it's a relatively complex process, you may not be able to get through all of the activities in one sprint. But you could have a series of sprints where, you look at, an activity or a set of activities during one sprint, and then you look at the next set of activities during the next sprint. You also certainly, if you have mature processes, could run a series of sprints just to continually improve the process. So making sure that you're doing things like monitoring your reports and analyzing your dashboards to see how you're performing, see where there are opportunities for you to improve, and then again running a series of sprints in order to work your way through those improvements, rather than waiting until you have time to undertake a full, revision of your entire process. Think about making those incremental improvements, especially if you have a situation where you have a process that's causing people pain. Figure out what the pain points are and make those little incremental improvements that can alleviate the pain. That will make people much more willing to follow the process. And it will also make people much more willing to give you feedback on how the process can be further improved. Right? That was great, right? That helped a lot, but here's what else would really help. Here are some additional changes that we can make. And as a process owner, that's the kind of feedback that you want to be getting. You could also, and I kind of talked about this on the previous slide, you could also just chunk down into sprints looking at these different process components. So you might have a sprint where you look at policies, or you might have a sprint where you look at certain activities. You might have sprints where you look at, making sure that people have the capabilities that they need, the skills, the knowledge, the education, the training that they need in order to be able to efficiently execute this process. And perform it as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So the idea is to make incremental improvements and to measure your success based on those increments. Now I know, and I'm sure there's some of you out there sitting there thinking like, this is never going to fly by my boss. My boss wants us to get this done. They want it done by the end of the year, and they want, right, and they want us to move on to something else. This notion of continual improvement is really challenging for us as an organization. And all I can say to you is learn the vocabulary, learn to talk about incremental improvement, learn to ask things like, what is the minimum viable product that we need to have in place at this time, and get that in place, and then look at, you know, continuing on making incremental improvements based on things like the reports that you're getting or the feedback that you're getting. Get really good at using those reports, not just producing the reports, but actually using them. Also find a way in order to capture the feedback. So on an earlier slide, I showed you the Scrum methodology, which includes something called a process backlog. It's in that process backlog where you're going to capture your requirements. Some of you might have a CSI register. So get good at capturing, right, that feedback so that you have a mechanism to prioritize it and progressively work your way through making those improvements. So I love this quote from Tim Ottinger, who's an Agile consultant, because I think he, in a really fun, tongue-in-cheek way, sums up the notion of this incremental, iterative and incremental improvement. You have to get stuff in front of people as early and often as possible so they can say yes, no, almost. You want to discipline them repeatedly in a controlled fashion over a number of months so that eventually you can make them extraordinarily happy. So it's a funny way of saying it. But for those of us who are perfectionists, and I certainly count myself as one of them, this is an important principle to embrace, because sometimes with process design and improvement, again, we aim to design this perfect process and we don't even want to show it to anybody until it's absolutely perfect. And really in this day and age, what we need to do is get information out in front of people, get their feedback, and then use that feedback. That's going to enable us to get closer to the mark, or better still, hit the mark more quickly. So let me make the case for Agile Service Management, and a very high percentage of you, 41%, said you're using Agile and DevOps. So I'm going to couch this in a DevOps example. If you look at, and across the top we have the Agile, the IT Service Management Service Lifecycle, the ITIL Service Lifecycle, and within IT Service Management, we have a process, or a set of processes: release and deployment management, change, and service asset and configuration management. And what ITIL says is these processes have to stay in sync, right? If you put something under the control of change management, you've just put it under the control of service asset and configuration management and release and deployment as well, right? So that notion of control helps us define the scope of these processes. So we've got these processes, right? These proven IT service management processes. We also have, and I introduced this notion of practices early on, we also have evolving DevOps practices. And the DevOps practices we hear about most often include continuous integration, continuous testing, and continuous delivery. And these practices are certainly now recognized in the DevOps community. They now are really pretty fully understood. Their definitions are pretty well fleshed out. They've been to some extent codified in terms of what they look like. But the how, in terms of how we perform these practices within our organization, is different not only from one organization to another, but perhaps from one team to another within an organization. And that's okay. That's the nature of practices. Remember that practices are repeatable and they're socially recognized, right? But they're not formalized. They're not mandated within an organization. So we've got these practices, and it's interesting with DevOps, and the DevOps people are going to hate this when I say this, but I'm increasingly hearing a reference to a continuous delivery process, which says to me that these practices are evolving to the point where they are going to start to become formalized, and perhaps in some organizations how we approach these, not how, but what what activities this process comprises are going to start to be formalized and mandated within organizations, and that's where we see these practices evolving into processes. So I know the DevOps crowd likes to say, like, we don't need no stinking processes, right? But that's just part of the maturation process. Now, so how do we bridge the gap here between these processes that we have in place with ITIL and these emerging DevOps practices? We do it with process models. Now, by definition, a process model is a set of procedures. So remember I said early on that you don't need multiple change management processes. What you need are different sets of procedures depending on the type of change you're making. With DevOps practices, we absolutely need to increase the percentage of standard changes that we have in place within our organization. And that means, and a standard change by definition is something that is pre-approved, that it is in fact proceduralized, but the set of procedures is very limited. And with the DevOps, in the case of DevOps, we're in fact increasingly seeing organizations who are moving away from this idea of a change request or a request for change. And what we really want, the procedure, is that you have to record your change. And that change, when you have a fully automated deployment pipeline, may be actually recorded automatically, right? So no human being has to create that change record. It's created as a part of your deployment pipeline. So hopefully this makes sense. We bring together these concepts of processes, practices, and procedures in the form of process models, and understanding that you may have many, many process models associated with a given process in order to accommodate the varying levels of rigor that you need relative to that process. So another example might be things like the ITIL processes of incident and problem management and the evolving DevOps practice of chat ops. And chat ops is a practice where individuals are able to go into chat rooms and collaborate on instances. Very often these chat rooms have bots associated with them, so you can, from within the chat room, you can issue commands, you can collect information, and everyone can together look at that information. It's frequently used in the context of major incidents where something really critical has happened. We need to kind of swarm together in order to resolve that particular incident. And there can be, again, a process model associated with how we're going to handle these major incidents within ChatOps. We still have our process. Our process hasn't gone away. There are still going to be some incidents that may have to go through traditional Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. But in the case of major incidents, we say we're going to take a different approach. Now, I said this before, and I just want to say it again here. Models make it easy for people to do the right thing. So if you look at adapting your processes and kind of accommodate how to enable individuals in interaction, right, which is a big part of what ChatOps is helping organizations to do, people will follow the process. And here's the reality. They don't even know they're following the process. They might not call it incident management, and that's okay, right? We've enabled that work to get done, and we've enabled the information we need to get captured. That's what's really important. So one of my favorite quotes is, perfection is achieved when there's nothing left to take away. And I put this slide up not only because it's my favorite quote, but because I wanted to remind you, invite Lean to this party as well, right? So Agile and IT service management work very well together. Lean helps you reduce waste. It helps you improve flow across your processes. It focuses on value to the customer. And so there are just a myriad of excellent Lean tools that can really help you with all of this. So the bottom line here is that Agile service management embraces the principles of Agile. Deliver process increments quickly, respond to emerging requirements, adapt your processes based on whatever circumstances, needs, goals of your organization. And embrace empirical process control. Empirical process control says, let's make decisions based on observation and experimentation. So let's show our work to people. Let's get feedback from them. Let's experiment with different approaches to handling our process models, for example, and let's then improve based on the results of those experiments. So rather than this detailed upfront planning where we lay out a process and we, again, try to cross every T and dot every I, we make decisions based on observation, experimentation. The 3 pillars of empirical process control are being very, very transparent and open about what we're doing. Here's where Kanban boards can really help us. Again, the notion of inspection, putting our work out in front of people, and adapting what we're doing based on the feedback we get. So how do you get started? One of the first things that you can do is build and educate a cross-functional team. So a lot of you have said you're putting DevOps, you're introducing DevOps practices, so we need Dev and Ops, or we need Dev and QA and security and Ops together in order to improve our processes. We can't do it in isolation, or we're probably going to end up building in constraints. Educate them on Agile service management practices. Educate them on ITIL. You know, part of adapting ITIL is let's first of all understand why ITIL is viewed as best practice and then adapt from there. The idea isn't just to say this will never work here. Let's seek first to understand and then to adapt. Adopt ITIL and embrace its guiding principles. If you've not yet heard about or seen, a new ITIL publication has been introduced called ITIL Practitioner Guidance. There's a new certification called ITIL Practitioner based on that publication. And ITIL Practitioner introduced 9 guiding principles, and I've provided them for you on your screen. And if you really look at these 9 guiding principles, you see Agile in there. You see Lean in there. You know, Lean certainly challenges organizations to focus on value. Agile challenges us to progress iteratively. We talked about the importance of being transparent, and I think we can all live with the principle of keeping it simple. So I've provided all of the guiding principles, but it's an excellent publication. It's an excellent, there's a course associated with ITIL Practitioner, and it's really just a good way to shift your thinking about IT service management process design and improvement to a more agile way to approach things. So adopt ITIL, embrace its principles, and then take a step back as an organization and kind of figure out what you're trying to accomplish. So get clear on what processes you need to improve. There are key processes, for example, associated with DevOps, and you may prioritize those processes so that you can better enable DevOps. Create what I call a minimum viable ITSM checklist, and basically that checklist will help you to kind of set some guardrails in terms of what you're going to design into your processes, things like minimum critical activities, and what you want to design out of your processes, like maybe too many handoffs and too many approvals. Set some goals to simplify your processes and optimally to automate your processes, and also set some goals on the savings over time that you can achieve as a result of making these improvements. And then adapt your ITIL processes. So again, adapting your processes says, let's figure out what's the best flavor, so to speak, of this process that we need to have in place right now, given the circumstances and the needs and the goals of our organization. You may, as an organization, historically been very risk adverse, and so you have extremely rigorous processes, and your organization has shifted its risk profile, so you can perhaps take some weight away from some of those overly rigorous processes. Remember to experiment and learn, and things like process models are good ways to do that. And then claim the benefits. Remember that repeatable processes are measurable, and if you can measure a process, you can baseline it, and you can show proof of concept that you have, in fact, made beneficial changes. So who helps to educate this team and who helps to move this team forward? Agile Service Management introduces 2 roles, the Certified Agile Service Manager and the Certified Agile Process Owner. In Scrum, there is a role known as a Scrum Master. The Agile Service Manager is a counterpart to that role. So the Agile Service Manager helps people to just understand Agile Service Management and how to adapt Scrum to Agile Service Management. The Agile Process Owner is comparable to what is called in Scrum the Product Owner. So this is the individual who's responsible for making sure that the requirements of the process are understood and that the process is in fact delivering value. So both are grounded in Agile Service Management and both help you better understand Agile Service Management. So if you want to learn more, I've provided in your deck a little look at our course catalog, and I'm going to hand over to, I think, Eric to talk a little bit about specifically the Agile Service Management offerings that we have. And you can see I've provided a little calendar of the next classes and when they're going to be. And Eric has a little bit of an offer for you. So, Eric?
Hi. Thanks, Donna, for the introduction. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And as always, a great webinar. I always learn so much during your webinars. I feel like my brain is expanding. I love it. So yeah, we do have a couple of offerings coming up for both Certified Agile Service Manager and Certified Agile Process Owner. They're coming up early 2017, and the first one's going to be CASM, that's Service Manager, coming up January 31st, and Process Owners coming up February 28th. I know those seem like a couple of months away, but you know how it is with the holidays. They just snap and they're here. So we do have an offer because we want to get people registered and in so that they can use their budget dollars too for 2016. That offer is going to be 20% off either one of the courses, and you can just go onto our website and use the coupon code AGILE20, A-G-I-L-E 20. Right at checkout. That'll give you the 20% off, and you can use that and join the class. I also wanted to talk just a brief moment about our Agile Pass for anybody that's interested in getting a little bit more in-depth knowledge. That the Agile Pass provides three of 5 classes, your choice, between Certified Agile Service Manager, Certified Agile Process Owner, then our Certified Process Design Engineer course, and you can choose ITIL Foundation or DevOps Foundation as one of our offerings as well, and you can upgrade to an Agile Pass Plus too if you want to take 4 of those classes. So if you're interested in gaining a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of Agile, I would definitely suggest the Agile Pass, but if you just need one of these classes, then I'm happy to have you. Just go ahead and use AGILE20 on the website. As always, please feel free to reach out to me at info@itsmacademy.com with any questions about our classes. And I'm going to hand it back over to Donna so she can answer your questions about the webinar. Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome. And I know we're close to time, so if you have to drop off, please put your question into the chat box. I always do a little bit of a log at the end of these webinars, and so I will answer your question if you need to drop off, but if you want to hang around, I'm going to hang around too until you don't have any more questions for me. So.
And I'm going to hang around with you too, Donna. George, you've put a question into the in here for us, and could you just look at that and give us a little clarification on the question? If you would, that would be great. And for those of you that do need to drop off, I'd just like to remind you that due to the holidays, there is no December webinar. So our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, January 19th. And we're going to send you the invitation for that in the month of December, so we can be looking for that. And we at ITSM Academy want to wish you the very best of the Thanksgiving and the holiday season. Okay. Rick has a question. He wants to know what are the prereqs for CPDE, CASM, and CAPO?
So CPDE does, well, and I'm going to be willing to stand corrected, but I'm going to say actually all 3 of those don't have a prereq. You have pre-work that you do for all of these classes, but they don't have a prereq. So in other words, you don't have to achieve some particular certification in order to enter any one of those classes.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, George has his question, and his question came when you were on the slide of where to start, right?
Okay.
Is that where you are? So his question was, instead of issuing one big release per year, let's say you may produce a much bigger number of releases?
Correct.
And
is that the question?
Yes.
So yes, correct.
Incremental, right? Incremental.
Correct.
Incremental
right.
steps. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So if that answers your question, George, that's great. If not, please just chat some more questions back into us.
Yeah, the idea is to, again, release, in the context of process increments, the idea is to release those process increments when it makes sense to. You know, certainly you may have some situations where, you know, if you're making changes to multiple activities and they are interrelated activities, you don't want to change one activity and then a month later change another activity and then a month later change another activity. It's kind of like the fastest way to demoralize people is to constantly tweak a process out from under them. So you may kind of stack those activities up and then release, you know, a new increment of your process in its entirety with, you know, 3 changes associated with it. But if you have a policy in place, for example, that is really causing pain within your organization, then maybe the answer is change your policy and introduce a new policy so that you're better able to achieve the results of your process.
Great, thank you. And Satya is asking, CASM is based on Scrum or Lean framework?
Scrum. So all the Agile Service Management courses, Certified Agile Service Manager and Certified Agile Process Owner, utilize Scrum. Now, Lean principles get introduced in those courses because, again, like I said, it makes sense to bring Lean to the party, but they are not Lean courses. Agile Service Management is founded on Scrum and adapting Scrum to Agile Process Design, adapting Scrum to IT Service Management Process Design and Improvement. So you learn about Scrum, you learn a lot about Scrum, and you learn then how to adapt Scrum to Agile Service Management.
Thank you, Donna. And those are all the questions that I have right now. So if anybody else has any more questions, now's the time to be asking them for Donna. So just let me know.
That was easy.
It was easy. And once again, I'd like to remind you all that the next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, January 19th. And we will send you the information for that so you can register. And then also the Q&A report will be available for you. We'll send it out, send you the link in just a couple of days. That'll be available for you. And as always, the recorded webinars are on our website, and we'll just convert that after this webinar, and we will post that up on our website so you can have a look at that anytime you want to have that. And I think, Donna, we are, let's see, here we go. We have all of thank you, Donna. That was a very good start for me in Agile Service Management. That was from Simona. And Sarah said, thank you as always. Always very informative. I had my entire team dial in. Thank you, Sarah.
Nice. Thanks.
And Stephen said, thanks to you, Donna. This was interesting and very useful content. And Tony said a great webinar. So everybody has got a lot of value. Yeah, got a lot of value for that one. Great webinar. So, and thank you, Donna, for joining us. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Reach out if you think of any questions.
Yes.
And have a great day.
Yep. And again, have a very, very happy Thanksgiving and a wonderful holiday season. And we'll see you in 2017. Take care, everybody.